Hey everybody, great to be learning with you today as we continue our studies of Parshat Vayechi and begin to look at what the commentaries have to say in this edition of Comcast. So the Parsha opens with a very interesting request by Yaakov. The Torah says that Yaakov was getting older and getting ready to die. Vayikravu Yemei Yisrael Lamut, and Yisrael, Yaakov, was getting older and ready to pass on. Vayikra Livno Liosef, and calls for his son Yosef. And as you read in the Torah, Yaakov asks Yosef to do him a favor and to make sure that he doesn't get buried in Mitzrayim. But I have two questions for you here. The first is, why does Yaakov specifically call on Yosef and not any of his other sons? Yosef wasn't the oldest. That was Reuven. Yosef wasn't even his go-to guy. That was Yehuda. Think about Yehuda being sent ahead of the other brothers to go set up a Beit Midrash in Goshen. So why is Yaakov calling on Yosef? And secondly, isn't it obvious that Yosef is his son? Why does it have to say, Vayikra Livno LeYosef, that he called to his son, Yosef? It could have just told us he called for Yosef and we would have known. Obviously, it's his son. Rashi here says something very important. He tells us that of all of the sons that Yaakov had, only Yosef had the power to actually make this happen, to ensure that Yaakov got buried in Me'arat Machpelah and not in Egypt. And so, of all of his sons, Yosef had the power, and therefore Yaakov called on him specifically. So that answers the question of why Yosef and not any other son was called upon by Yaakov. But this doesn't answer the other question of why it says his son Yosef. So for that, we turn to a comment of Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim tells us something amazing. He says that the only reason Yaakov should have ever been able to make this request in the first place was because Yosef was his son. Ordinarily, a person could never demand of the king, hey, king, do me a favor, make sure that I don't get buried in Egypt, which is what normally should have happened for someone in Yaakov's place. Instead, bury me where I want to be buried, not where you, the Egyptians, want to bury me. It's a very presumptuous request. It's a very big request by Yaakov. And so Or HaChaim says that no person should ever make this kind of request to a king, and Yaakov ordinarily should never have been able to make it in the first place, but only because Yosef was his son did Yaakov make this particular request. So this answers the question of why the Torah tells us what seems to be not important information, why the Torah said, Livno Yosef, to his son Yosef, because only because Yaakov was the father could he ask his son to do something like this. And I think this gives us some insight into how to speak to kings or people of authority. You know, remember back when Yaakov first met Paro, he blessed him, not once but twice. And both of those times showed a certain respect of the leader. And it showed us the way that we should interact with someone who's in authority. We also recall that when Yehuda was speaking to Yosef, before he knew it was really Yosef, he begged Yosef, please my master, I'm your servant. He used very humble language before Yosef. He didn't presume to talk to him angrily or with haughtiness. He knew his place. And so when you're talking to someone, whether it's a teacher, a parent, a coach, or anyone who's an authority figure, you should be careful about the way you speak and the words you use. Looking forward to continue learning with you in the text of the Chumash.